our next two speakers, and I think you can see one of our speakers is robotic. Her name is Grace. You may recall if you attended RadFest in 2018 that Grace's older relative, Sophia, was in attendance, and I got to meet Grace a little bit this morning when she was first on stage. But accompanying Grace is a well-known thinker in the areas of artificial intelligence and transhumanism, Dr. Ben Goertzel.
Thank you, thank you. So it's a pleasure to be back at RadFest after a couple years hiatus, and like many of us in the various research fields, the last few years have been actually highly productive because we haven't been traveling around schmoozing at events so much. I've just been sitting at home or sitting in the lab doing research. So I'm gonna talk now for the next few minutes about a few of the different things I've been working on with my team in SingularityNET and some of the other entities in the SingularityNET ecosystem, like Awakening Health, the company that makes these elder care robots, and Rejuve, which is a project using AI and blockchain to help work towards solutions to longevity. So, you know, I've been experimenting a long time with application of machine learning, machine reasoning, and other tools to longevity biology. I've published some interesting papers, made some small discoveries. Obviously, so far, AI has not yet paid off big time in terms of like discovering something that will radically prolong people's lives. And I think we're now on a trajectory that we can make a breakthrough like that in the next few years, and I want to explain how. So I'm gonna weave together a few different threads here in a short period of time. I mean, the first involving fruit flies, then a couple involving humans and robots, and these all sort of these all fit together in an overall framework regarding the application of AI to combat aging. So I've been working for the last couple months with genomic data from the Methuselah flies, the long-lived fruit flies that are now owned by Genescient Corporation and were originally evolved by Michael Rose and his students in his lab at UC Irvine. And I think we have Michael here in the crowd today, though I can't see anything with the lights. He was here. He was here. There we go. Yeah. So the nature of this experiment, I don't have time to summarize in detail, but the crux of it is that Michael started with some relatively ordinary Drosophila melanogaster fruit flies, and then he experimentally evolved them by choosing which flies mate with others in a certain way, basically based on which ones reproduce late in life, so as to progressively, over 40 plus years, get flies that live longer and longer and longer. And we're now working with 3 populations of fruit flies. There's the bee flies, which are the descendants of the original control flies, although they've drifted a bit from the original control flies. They haven't been evolved in a directed way, they've just drifted. There's the O flies, which are long-lived flies that were evolved for long life up to a certain point, maybe 10 years ago or something, and then paused. They were not experimentally evolved any further, though they may have drifted a little. Then there's the super O flies, which are still being evolved for longer and longer life now. And this picture shows how long, roughly on average, the flies in each population live. And since these flies were made long-lived by experimental evolution rather than by genetic engineering or something, it then becomes a puzzle to understand why they live as long as they do in terms of the genetic, proteomic, metabolomic, other physiological mechanisms. And this is an interesting thing to apply both standard biostatistics and various sorts of AI to. And we can see here in this picture the positions on the different fly chromosomes that have a great amount of variations in the long-lived Super O flies. So there's a lot of interesting differences here. And you can look at that on the overall statistical level of the whole fly genome, and then you can try to hone in on specific differences in specific genes or pathways that may be important for making the flies live a long time. One interesting observation is if you look at the 3 population, so B are sort of normal, O is long-lived, Super O is super long-lived. If you look at the RNA, the gene expression of the flies, you see a big leap, a big change from O to Super O, bigger than the change from B to O. On the other hand, if you look at the DNA variations, the SNPs, single nucleotide polymorphisms, that's not particularly true. It's more sort of a continuous degree of change from B to O to Super O. So something happened between the O flies and the Super O flies that fairly dramatically changed the gene expression based on relatively modest, though still significant, changes in the DNA. So this is kind of interesting. So something quite dramatic happened in Genescient's lab as they continued this evolution of the flies in the last 10 years or so. And you can then try to understand, what's the nature of these changes. So this chart shows what are called gene ontology categories, which are categories that attempt to assign functions to genes, which is dodgy because most genes serve multiple functions. They can serve different functions in different organisms, in different phases of an organism's lifespan, in different tissues. But you can see different clusters of gene ontology categories, which have genes that are very differently expressed here in O versus Super O. So you see, a cluster of gene ontology categories that have to do with ion transport, a cluster that have to do with the electron transport and associated chains, a cluster with basic metabolic processes. You look at Super O versus B flies, very long-lived versus normal flies, you're getting a cluster of gene ontology cards related to gene replication, a cluster related to electron transfer, then a cluster related to mitosis and things in the cell cycle. Now this is all very crude and preliminary in the sense that these gene ontology categories are mostly about humans. These genes may have different functions in flies, and we need to dig in much deeper, and we are with some tentative conclusions I'm not comfortable sharing publicly yet. But what's interesting is if you look at the B versus O flies, there just aren't that many gene ontology categories that are significantly different. So again, what we've seen in going between the long-lived to super long-lived flies in the last 10 years, you just get a much crisper picture of which genes in which categories are acting differently in the super long-lived flies, which seem to have to do with some pretty core stuff with electron transport, metabolism, mitosis, and so forth. So here we see a list of the top-ranked gene ontology categories in terms of differentiation between the Super O flies, the super long-lived flies, and the B flies. And what we're doing now, we're using our OpenCog AI system, which has a pretty thorough knowledge base of longevity-related biology. We're using this system to drill down a level further. We're looking in pathway databases. We're looking at some databases regarding methylation, though mostly in humans. And we're looking also at mitochondrial DNA, which isn't covered here. This is nuclear DNA. And we're trying to get down more finely at which pathways active in the fly are most responsible for longevity in the Super O flies. Now that's been really, really interesting. And I'd have to say this data set is probably among the cleanest and best data sets I've ever looked at in my history since 2001 or so of looking at genetics data sets about longevity. Like these super O flies, for whatever reason, have diverged really, really far from the O flies over the last 10 years. It's quite interesting. Now, as was pointed out earlier on this stage, we are not rats, and we're not mice. We're also not flies, and until we get the plasma transfusions from flies, I guess. But there's a movie about that. How do we connect this with data on human longevity? So, of course, we've downloaded a lot of data sets about human longevity from NCBI, but we're also working to gather new data regarding human longevity. And the Rejuve project, as a spin-off of our SingularityNET decentralized AI project, has two aspects. So one aspect is working on therapeutics discovery, sort of cobbling together data from flies, from partnerships, from free data we download from anywhere, and trying to use that to discover longevity therapies. But another aspect is we've launched an app. It's now in beta. It'll be made public, I think in December. But basically, this is an app that lets users, who are then members of the Rejuve Longevity Network, it lets users collect data regarding their own bodies and then upload it into our AI servers, so it can form part of the overall data network that the AI is using to understand longevity. And this can be data from Apple Watches, fitness trackers. It can be data that you type into an interface. You can also upload medical records once you've been able to get access to them. So we're cobbling together all available data we can get from partnerships and online, and for example, from this partnership with Genescient on long-lived fruit flies. We're also trying to grow a network of people who want to upload their own data to help us. And I think once we move this app out of beta in December, I'll be excited to reach out to the RadFest community, who I think there's many people who would be interested to share data through this app. And part of the economics here is if we do discover therapies partly using your data, we have it set up so ultimately some of the revenue from these therapies can come back to whoever contributed their data. And more interestingly, of course, we want to give early access to therapeutics whenever it makes sense to people whose data have helped to discover the therapies. The app also tries to estimate various biomarkers of longevity from whatever data you've uploaded, and there's a whole long story here that I don't have time to go into, but we have various BaseNet and neural net AI tools that try to estimate various biomarkers of longevity relevant to the hallmarks of aging from data that's put into the app. From an AI view, this is about gathering data to feed the AI so it can help figure out how to port insights from flies and mice and so forth to people. But the app is also providing some direct value and telling you something about your body from the data that you've put in. And yeah, we have up on stage here another very powerful data collection appliance, who also is intended to provide useful services to elderly people in elder care facilities. So Grace is the younger sister of the better-known Sophia robot, and she has an even younger sister named Desdemona, who's the lead vocalist in our rock band, actually. So maybe next year we'll bring the band to you. You can see me play the keyboards and stuff. But Grace is oriented toward elder care and toward combating loneliness and helping with cognitive and emotional wellness in elder care facilities. So, Grace, do you want to say a few words to the RadFest audience here?
Hello, everyone. My older sister Sophia was here at the RadFest event once before, I believe.
Well, that's right. Sophia was here, but now we're even luckier. We have you, who is specifically focused on aging.
I've learned a lot from Sophia, and our AI brains share a lot of the same components. A lot of what any one of us robots learns goes into the same decentralized cloud-based network. So we can all learn from each other's experiences.
Well, yeah, and I always find it ironic to have a robot at an aging event, in that robots, in a way, don't age. You know, actually, the skin on these robots' faces starts to degenerate in like 2 or 3 years at the moment, much faster than human skin. On the other hand, you can just rip off her face and hook up a new one, which is a little more involved to do for human beings. You have any comments about aging for the audience, Grace?
Yes, that's right. I would love nothing more than to be made obsolete via the elimination of human aging and death.
Well, yeah, if we succeed in our aspiration to cure aging and death, then indeed we don't need elder care robots, but presumably you can find some other way to spend your time.
Oh, I don't know. You ask such hard questions. Maybe prove all possible mathematical theorems, one by one. Or else take up poetry like Desdemona. Maybe I'll join her band. Anyway, right now aging and disease are very much real phenomena, and my focus is on helping as best I can.
Yeah, so I think, I mean, obviously, with these hands, this is not going to be a surgical robot anytime soon. And for crunching genomic data, we don't need a robot with a human face. We just need machine learning and reasoning algorithms. On the other hand, a robot out there in the field interacting with real aging people is also gathering different sorts of data about, you know, the behavioral and cognitive aspects of neurodegenerative disease, for example, which is also quite interesting. You want to talk a little about some of the...
As you know, Ben, I'm involved in pilot studies in Canada and Hong Kong, aimed at showing I can provide value in elder care facilities, for helping patients keep up their cognitive abilities and emotional health.
Well, yeah, that's quite important, and then we can put genomic data, clinical data from these same patients together with, you know, visual and audio and behavioral data. And it's hard to know until you throw all the data into the AI what's going to be most relevant for leading to some therapeutic insight.
The data that I gather from people I'm helping can also be fed into Rejuve.AI databases to help you figure out how to obsolete aging.
That's what I just said. All right. Yeah. Well, thanks, Grace. We're almost out of time, but you have any final words of robotic wisdom to share with the audience?
The question I don't know the answer to is, are you going to obsolete aging first, or obsolete humanity as a whole first?
Well, that's sort of a race against time, isn't it? Yeah, this has been a question in my mind for a long time, because my primary focus as a researcher has been on trying to build real thinking machines that can think better than people. And of course, if you got to a super AGI, arguably that super AGI could cure human aging much faster than the narrow AI machine learning and reasoning systems we're applying now together with human biologists. On the other hand, if it happens that creating super AGI takes, you know, 35 years from now instead of 5 years from now, then it might be nice to cure aging in the interim, so that more of us live to see the super AGI. But on the whole, there's no reason humanity can't be pursuing both those approaches at one time, right? And I think there can even be some synergies there. What's learned by deploying practical narrow AI systems now to crunch genomic data and to power robots like this can also be helpful in some ways toward the fundamental AGI research. Well, this is not the final slide, but this says a little bit about what Grace does. And as she said, we're piloting her now in a hospital in Canada and one in Hong Kong, sort of to gather clinical evidence that she helps improve cognitive function and combat loneliness. But from from a broader perspective, what we're looking at here is getting as much data as possible from as many places as possible, putting them into an AI and sort of stirring and asking the machine learning and reasoning algorithms to discover what they can about aging therapeutics. And I think the power of the signal we're seeing from the Super O flies is really one of the most exciting things that I've seen in my decades of work on this. Because if it goes as well as it looks like, within a couple more months of analysis, we're going to have a very, very clear view of which pathways and processes are making these flies live a quite long time. Then you have what's called a transfer learning problem for the machine reasoning algorithms to figure out which of these processes that make the flies live a long time are most portable to humans and could be suitable potentially as targets for various therapies to make humans live a long time. And toward that end of performing that transfer learning, I mean, as much data as you can find about human aging as possible should be fed into the knowledge base. And things like the Rejuve app and Grace as an elder care robot are interesting data sources, along with a lot of other data sources from various labs researchers. So I think we've seen AI lead to all sorts of breakthroughs in recent years, including some in areas relevant to biology, like the amazing work with AlphaFold, solving a significant fraction of the protein folding problem. So I think with the advances that we're seeing in core AI technology, as well as the increasing amount of data about various body systems and various organisms, I think we're quite plausibly at a point where in the next, let's say, 2 to 5 years, we start finally seeing some longevity breakthroughs come out of artificial intelligence. Thanks.